Hi, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. My name's Carrie, and I'm the owner of the Quilter's Candy Shop, and we are so happy you're here with us today. We are continuing on with our sew along for the Rainy Days quilt pattern, and it's coming along great. We're actually on week 6, and this week we are going to be working on our 5th flower. So here's some of the ones we've done already. Aren't they cute? Our little garden is growing. Now, it's not too late for you to join our sew along. All you need for the sew along is to purchase the pattern called Rainy Days, and it is by Poppy Cotton. We have these in our quilt store at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE, thequilterscandyshop.com. And you can pick up the pattern if you like. You can also pick up a quilt kit in our country colors, and we also have some bundles that would be beautiful. Or you can just shop from your own stash. This week we are going to be working on flower number 5, and that is this one, the daisy. And we are going to be building on something we learned last week, which was the flying geese. And so now we're going to be making more flying geese right here. And we have a new leaf stem. So this is going to be a new addition to our repertoire on these blocks, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So come along with me and we will pick out some fabrics for our block. And here we have the daisy. It's flower number 5, and we are going to be making 4 of these flowers. I'm going to be using this dark blue. It's so cute with these little tiny flowers on it, white and light blue. That's going to be the main flower. And then it's going to have this nice light blue around the center, the pink in the center, and this so cute plaid green for the leaves. We have different leaves this time. There's only 2, but they're offset, so you'll have to make sure that you have J and K in their proper position. Also in this pattern, there's an error in the placement. It's correct over here. So when you're going to lay out your leaf here and you're following these directions, follow this layout plan. The letters over here are wrong. I've changed mine on my pattern, and you should probably change yours. Now we just have to go cut our fabric. All right, here we have everything cut. We are making 4 flowers, so make sure you have multiplied by 4 the number indicated on the pattern so you have enough of everything you need. We have the petals, the inner and the center. We have the leaves and the base of the flower that attaches to the stem. Now F and G are 2 different sizes, so make sure you have these marked clearly because you don't want to get them in the wrong place. Don't forget that M, K, and J are marked incorrectly in the assembly section of the pattern, so correct that before you assemble. If you have any other questions, put them in the comments below. I'd be happy to help you with them. All right, let's get to sewing. Here I've already put one together so we can look at the anatomy of the quilt block. Right here we have our flying geese unit, and we have 4 of them around this flower. 3 of them have the background, and 1 of them has the green stem color. So you're going to have to watch your placement on this, but they're all made the same. This is a very simple block. It's not going to take you long to do. The only place where we have some issue is where we have these are mismarked on the pattern. I know I've told you before, but just as a quick reminder, J, K, and M are mismarked in the second half of the pattern. So use the first column layout when you're going to put your block together. There will be some specific pressing instructions for the flower, so watch all the way to the end to get the best results. Let's sew it. Okay, so here I've laid out our leaves again, and the only thing that is different is that we have 2 leaves only, and they're a little offset because you have made so many leaves by now that you will be able to do this in a flash. For those of you not using diagonal seam tape, here's a couple of really good techniques for getting your stitch and flip super accurate when using a pen or pencil for marking your diagonals. Depending on your surfaces, sometimes when you go to mark your diagonal line, you will get your fabric to pull up, and even sometimes it'll go so far as to buckle, and that will cause inaccuracies in your line. So this technique is a really old-fashioned technique, but it works even today. Right here I have a piece of 100 grit sandpaper. Ideally you would have a piece big enough to cover any size that you're doing your diagonal line on, and since we're doing these little small squares, this is big enough. So this technique, using the sandpaper, holds your piece of fabric flat while you're marking it. Put your ruler right across on the diagonal, point to point. I'm going to use just a regular pencil because it slides so well across. Tip your pencil down and drag across so you get a really nice smooth line. And that's all you need. You can also use your friction marker or whatever you're using, but in this case I like the pencil. Now when we go to stitch this askant, let me show you what scant actually means. So I've changed fabrics so that you can see a little more clearly the placement of the line, and the stitches will show much better on this color than on cream. So the first thing you have to do is when you're placing your ruler, allow for the thickness of your marking tip, whether it's a pencil or a friction marker. So you're going to want to leave, you can see here, the little tip of the square that I'm working with is just showing, and the same up here. So in other words, don't get your ruler right on top of the points. You have to allow for the thickness of your marker. So when you make your line across here, it's going to be right on the tip to tip. So now your line is perfectly lined up from tip to tip. And when we sew, we're going to sew right next to that line, literally 1 thread away. Put your point right up to the needle and put your presser foot down to hold it in place, and then just take a couple of stitches to get your needle into the fabric. Now, as you're sewing, keep your eyes here and watch to make sure your line is going right beside the needle. Most presser foots have a little mark on the presser foot where the needle is. You want the line to the side of that mark. Stitch slow, or a little slower than your normal speedy sewing. So now you can see the stitched line is literally right next to my marked line. And when this folds over and everything lines up, you have created the space for this amount of fabric to go across the line. When you unfold it, you can see that the fold is on the line and the stitching is next to the line. Okay, now that we've got ourselves a good scant seam line, All we have to do is chain stitch the rest of our leaves and put the rest of our leaf and stem section together. All right, the leaves are done. This one was so fun to make because I think these leaves offset are adorable. And now we are off to the flowers. Okay, we are on to the flower. I always like to set up my pieces out flat so I can make sure I've got everything I need and all of the labeled pieces are in the proper place. R is going to go in all four corners. Q is the background piece for the flying geese, and F is the background piece for the flying geese that makes the stem. B is your long pieces. C is your side pieces to your center square, A. C is not a square, it's oblong, so make sure you have those turned the right direction. And now that I have this laid out, I'm actually going to disassemble it so we can do some fast chain piecing. The first thing we're going to do is assemble this row. And in chain piecing, we're going to put all of these onto all of these, come back, put all of these onto the other side, and then press it all at one time. Line everything up and use a scant 1/4 inch. Okay, I've got my pieces here and we are going to group press them by setting the seam. And then we're going to open them up. Now, we're going to be stitching this piece onto this one, which has no seams or anything to interrupt. So you pretty much can press these however you want. You can press them all one way, you can press them all the other, you can press them open, or you can press them in, or you can press them out. So whatever you like, I recommend you do all three of them the same. I happen to like these to go out, so that's what I'm going to do with mine. Now we'll stitch the bar on both sides of those center pieces. Here's another handy tip. Make sure you get everything set up right next to where you're going to sew for fast and efficient chain piecing. So I'm going to put my bottom piece on all three of my flowers I have to make. And we're going to put that down on the bottom so we can manage our seam allowances. I'm not going to press this just now. I'm going to go ahead and put my second bar across the top and we'll press it all together in one pressing. Okay, here again, I'm going to leave these flat to set the seam. Do all of them at the same time. Since I have these seam allowances, I'm going to press these out and we have a nice clean back with very little bulk. Perfect. Let's go on to the flying geese. Here I am set up again for fast chain piecing. My diagonals are all marked the same direction because they're easily flipped from this side to this side. And we're going to sew all of our pieces on the right side first, and then we'll press them, trim them, and then we'll come back and sew all of our pieces on the left side. That way all of our flying geese are set up the same. The flying geese for the green is done exactly the same as the flying geese for the background, so they can be in the same pile and you can just do the whole stack at once. Here we go. Don't forget to be efficient, but accurate. So line everything up. Put the tip right up to your needle. Take a couple of stitches and then sew right next to that line. Perfect. Let's do them all. Okay, when you're sewing a lot of things that start on a point, you can occasionally have a sewing machine that goes a little cranky and shoves that point down inside instead of stitching nicely across. The way to avoid this is using, some people call it a tiger tail, a cotton tail, or a thread saver. And that's just a 2-ply piece of fabric that you use as a lead. What that does is, as you get this set up, you sew across, and you can see there's fabric on the feed dogs, and your needle is on the edge of that fabric. So when you go to place your next piece, that's not the right way. That would have been bad. When you go to place your next piece and you put it right up to that needle, the needle is going to go from fabric to fabric, and 99% of the time will not shove that tip down in the hole. So it looks like this. And when you're done, if you bring it around to the front side, let's say I'm done making my chain and I put my thread saver through. The amount of thread you're using in that small of space is far less than if you pull this piece off and cut it and you have all that thread lying out there. That thread that ends up out here can also cause your tips to go down in the hole. So I highly recommend getting in the habit of using a cottontail or a thread saver, especially when doing points like this. We'll do one more so you can see how great this is. The feed dogs are covered, the hole is covered. You're going to go right to the edge of your cottontail, put your point right up there, and sew. And can you see that it went right across without any trouble? Continue sewing all of your flying geese, and we'll see you at the ironing board. Okay, here I have my first wing sewn onto my flying geese. And so to set myself up for some group pressing, I'm just going to lay them all out here. Depending on how many you're doing, if you have hundreds to do, you might not be able to lay them all out at once, but we just have these few. So I'm going to set my seams all at one time. And then I'm going to press my wings out. And here's where the clapper is handy, because now all of them can be resting and cooling while I'm ironing the next one. When you get all of these pressed, Then you're going to trim the seam allowance and we'll go on to the next wing. Okay, here we've got one set of wings already completed, and now we are going to put the other half on here. All of these get sewn the same, so this is a perfect opportunity for more chain piecing. This one, you can see the line is going across this way. Line everything up. Make sure you have your angle going the right direction and that this is going to cross on this one side. So now you can see my scant seam allowance right next to my line. And this is going to flip over just like that. And now we have a flying geese. I'm going to do that with all of these and I'll meet you at the ironing board. All right, we've got our second wing sewn onto our flying geese. So we're going to group press and set the seams. And then start pressing our wings to the outside. Because we've pressed both wings to the outside, we've got this nice little X where we're going to stitch across to make sure we get our perfect points on our flying geese. All right, trim these up and we'll assemble our flower. Here we've got all of our flying geese made and I've laid them out around our already put together center. Now the way we made the flying geese and pressed them, right here on the back, we now have a little X with the threads. Comes right across here. And that's going to be our point for when we sew this on, we'll be able to see where to sew in order to keep this perfect point on our flying geese. I have also added to the layout piece number R, and this is going to go in all four corners. We're going to start by setting up a chain piecing section by putting our two top and bottom flying geese right here next to R, and we're going to sew them on all on the same side. You're going to line up R with your corner of your flying geese, put R on the bottom, and stitch across the end. That way you can manage your seam allowance. Just like this. Here we have all of our flying geese with the R square attached to one side, and now we're going to attach the R square to the other side on the entire stack. Here are our flying geese with the R square sewn on both sides. Again, we're going to do our group pressing, set the seams, on this unit, we are going to press the R squares out away from the flying geese. So that's both seam allowances going away from the flying geese. Here's where you have to pay attention. Put the green at the bottom and the white at the top. This is a common mistake. Can you see what's wrong here? Make sure all of your points are pointing toward the center. It's very easy to get these wrong because for some reason flying geese look like they're right, even when they're wrong. It's sometimes very hard to see that they are out of place. So take a minute now and just make sure your points on your flying geese are all pointed toward the center of the flower. Next, we're going to join this to this side and this to this side, and then we'll press all at once. All right, because our flying geese on both sides of the center are exactly the same, I've put all of my flying geese that it's going on the side in one pile, and the center's here. This is going to make for fast and easy chain piecing. Just going to flip this over and sew it down. When I'm done, I'll just turn the whole pile around and then I'll flip this over and sew it down. Here we go. Now on this side, you have your X from your stitches, and we're going to stitch right across the top of that point, not through the center of the X, but right across the top of the point, leaving enough space for the fabric to come over the top like a scant 1/4 inch. And on the back side, we have these 2 seam allowances. Because we want to be able to see this X to get a good point, we are going to put these 2 seam allowances on the bottom near our feed dogs. So we're going to start right here and just check like this to make sure that seam allowance is going the right way. If you did a good job pressing, it should stay very well. Now, as we come across for the X, I've got everything lined up for my scant 1/4 inch, and my needle should go right across the tip of that X and all the way down. Let's do that again. Line this up. Get set up to sew. Take a couple stitches and then check that this seam allowance is tucked towards the feed dogs. Hold it in place as you go. Now we're going to go across the top of the X. Excellent. Oh, that's funny. Excellent. Haha. And now, even though we have this seam allowance, it is going the same way as we're sewing, so we don't have to be so careful and mindful of that. We can probably just sew straight across. We'll do one more so you can really see it in action. Line this up. Get ready for a scant 1/4 inch. Take a few stitches. Make sure this seam allowance is going the right direction. Get set up for a scant 1/4 inch. And aim for the top of that X. Continue on. And we're done. Perfect. All right, we're going to leave our flying geese tucked under so that it's flat. Turn the center around and do the same thing on this side. Okay, now we have both flying geese sewn on the side of our centers. Set the seams. And I know by now you're probably getting tired of hearing me say set the seams, but this is such an important little step that it's easy to forget and get out of the habit. So I'm going to say set the seams every time so that you know every time you have to set the seams. Now, flying geese points have a lot of bulk. They've got both sides of the fabric on this wing, both pieces of fabric on this wing, the center flying geese, and now we've attached it to the block. So right here is going to be a bulky section. So 99% of the time, you are going to want to press away from the flying geese because there's far less bulk in these two seam allowances than there is right here. And you will see this is naturally going to want to go this direction. So that's what we're going to do. All of our flying geese are going to get pressed like this. All right, I'll put these on the clapper, and the clapper is going to go on the flying geese section. The sides don't matter quite so much because they're going to behave themselves. There we go. All right, we're almost done. Okay, this is it. We're going to put this bottom one on first because it's special. And when we have that one complete, we can come back and do this one without getting everything cattywampus. So set yourself up for success by putting the 3 that are going to go on last on the bottom, the 3 that are going to go on first on top, and in case you have directional fabric, this is the bottom of the flower, goes right there. Okay, so now all we have to do is flip these over, sew it on, press, come back, flip these over, and sew it on. Now, for those of you who don't pin, keep in mind that these 2 seam allowances are going to go in opposite directions for nesting. Pay attention to that they are nested properly. For those of you who like to pin, 3 pins on each is a really good idea. So we'll pin 1 for this nested seam allowance. And I like to do the other side first over here. And I like to pin, so on this side, you see I pinned down. As we're going across sewing, we're going to run into this. So that's the side I pinned down. As we come across over here, this one's already going the right way. So I like to put my pin on this side, and that's holding this seam allowance from getting folded under as we sew. Now that these 2 are pinned, you can make sure that you've got the right amount of fabric in here. And so we just put a pin right through that center. And it kind of marks the spot where we're going to stitch across. Let's give it a try. Okay, we've got our flying geese on one side. Now we're going to do the other side before we press, and then we'll press this all at the same time. Same technique, you're going to nest your seams here, and pin your point and sew. We have our flying geese tops and bottoms put on. So, set the seam. Hey, when we open this up, looks great. We're going to want our points of our flying geese pointed to the inside and this seam allowance all the way towards the center. Now when you get to the points on the outside, like here and here, you might have to give a little extra assist with your iron because there's a lot of bulk here and they're going to want to resist. But with a little heat and pressure, they usually acquiesce. And there you go. There's our flower. Let's put our stems and our flowers together and we'll be done. Okay, the first person to put a comment below on what is wrong with this block will get a 10% coupon off of our shop. And this is really just a fun way to say it's easy to make a mistake. If you do, don't sweat it. Just take out the seam and re-sew, which is what I'm going to do with this one. Okay, so basically I took this seam apart right here and I turned and put this on in the right place. We're going to press. And I'm going to use, because this one's been a bit manhandled, I'm going to use a little starch to help me get this all straightened out. Just like that. Once the fabric is moist with starch, it is a little more susceptible to stretching. So just be kind when you're pressing. And one beautiful thing about quilting is everything is fixable. So give yourself a little grace and just move forward. And here we are, all 4 of our daisies put together with the cute new leaf and stem. You guys are going to be professional leaf sewers. Ha ha ha. I love the blue and pink together. It's right up my alley, and I think these are just as sweet as can be. So, we'll see you next week where we will continue to sew something sweet.